Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to do part 2 of my wrap up for the books that I read in January 2025. So the next 2 books I kind of read back to back. They're on similar topics. I don't know how to talk about them because I don't know, I feel like they're going to be difficult books to talk about because they're about food and diet and nutrition, which is not my typical read, but something that I've been increasingly more interested in reading about. Cards on the table being that you may be able to tell that I have lost weight this past year. It has been deliberate. It has been something that I think has been done in a healthy, sustainable way, but is something that has made me a bit more conscious about the food that I'm eating, diet and exercise, not in like an obsessive way, but I'm just generally thinking about long-term health, about what I'm doing to my body, about, you know, I will just say 2023 especially, I was not very careful with my body. I took it for granted and was not very good to it, and that came out in some health issues that I had never had before. And so while I've been losing weight in 2024, I've come up against several books that I had seen and had a passing interest in. And the main reason that I didn't want to pick up these books, particularly when I was like in the thick of trying to lose weight, is because, as I say, I am very, very conscious about not wanting to be obsessive with food, not wanting to be constantly like picking apart food labels and doing all that kind of thing. I am very much of the opinion that a healthy diet and exercise is one that has a very additive approach, as in adding in more variety, particularly in the form of like fruits and vegetables, but just generally like varying up your diet and not just sticking to like certain safe foods and constantly worrying about like the calorie count of things, at least when it comes to like your long-term diet and health and fitness. I am very, very anti cutting out food groups because I just don't think it works. I think the second that you cut something out, that is when your brain is going to want it the most. But you know, you add more fruit and veg, more colour to your plate. I've watched a lot of Abby Sharp, so I've been thinking a lot about meals needing to have protein, fibre and fat in order for them to be satiating. I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been thinking a lot about like trying to add and incorporate 30 plants per week, and that's been really working for me. And what I worried about reading these books is that it was going to make me want to cut foods out and be just generally like quite distrustful going into a supermarket. But I felt like the time is now. I wanted to give these books a go. And I mentioned in part 1 that there was a book that I had read, you know, while it wasn't necessarily a fantastic reading experience, was a very influential book just going forward in my life. And it was one of these books. It is Ultra Processed People, Why Do We All Eat Stuff That Isn't Food and Why Can't We Stop by Chris Van Tulleken. Once again, saw this book everywhere. It looked so severe and quite intimidating. And once again, you know, I can understand the dangers of ultra processed food, but also thinking to myself, if this is very fear-mongering, if this is just going to scare people off of food, that can potentially be really, really damaging. How is this going to play with people who have eating disorders, particularly orthorexia? Is this just going to scare people into those kind of tendencies? Actually, having read this, I don't think it is trying to do that at all. This book is really not about giving people advice for the food that they eat. It is much more a commentary on the food industry and how prioritization of profit over the health of the general public has led to these foods being so much more prevalent. In this book, he's talking about ultra processed food. Now, most food that we eat is processed in some way, even the healthiest things. You know, if you are cooking something, if you're boiling it, roasting it, adding ingredients to things, you are processing them. When he's talking about ultra processed food, it is talking about these manufactured ingredients that you wouldn't find in a typical kitchen. The reason that there is a loaf of bread on the cover is because, you know, in order to make bread, you only actually need 4 ingredients: flour, yeast, water, salt. And yet, if you look at the back of most slices of bread in a UK supermarket, you will see many, many more ingredients: emulsifiers, xanthan gum, preservatives, additives, basically in order to make these foods last longer, to make them hyper palatable, so you want to eat a lot more. The comparison that he gives is that, you know, you eat a slice of sourdough bread that is completely homemade, it tends to be harder, it takes you longer to eat. I've definitely noticed this, like it takes me forever to eat a salad, as opposed to if I was making a sandwich, I'd be able to down that within 5 minutes, but it genuinely takes me like at least half an hour to eat a salad, if not longer. And because how easy these foods are to eat, it ends up disrupting your natural like hunger cues. The additive ingredients make you want to consume more and more of them, and so you end up over consuming on these foods in a way that you just wouldn't with the non-ultra processed versions. And he goes into lots of different topics in here, how ultra processed foods became much more prevalent in the 1970s. Part 2 goes into this whole section which is about, well, isn't the onus on the consumer? Isn't it really the public's fault? And he basically debunks a lot of these myths. So he goes through the role of sugar, whether or not you can can combat these foods with exercise, the role of willpower, and basically how it is not about individuals or willpower when these foods are just thrown into your face all the time, the effects that these foods can have on your body. But ultimately, this is a book that is about industries, about governments and what they can do to change this, and how it is very unlikely that they will. Throughout this book, Chris Van Tulleken is very adamant that he is not here to give advice for people, but if he is going to give any, it is not to entirely cut this out, because he admits that it's going to be really hard to do this. For myself, since reading this book, I am starting to try out different breads, trying out non-UPF breads to see if I notice a difference. And one notable difference is that the non-UPF breads are so much more expensive. I think it's the Jason sourdough that I recently picked up, and it cost me £2 for this loaf of bread, which is smaller, maybe has like half the amount of slices that my normal King's Mill would have. And you know, I'm buying for myself as a single person. It is completely understandable why, if you are a busy parent, you know, mother of 2 children, family of 4, 5, 6, that yeah, you're probably not going to want to have to spend like £6 every week on your bread when one loaf of King's Mill for £1 is going to do the job. But this is kind of his point, that these foods are so accessible, they are cheaper, whereas committing to a non-UPF diet takes a lot more time and a lot more money. Like, yes, maybe we could all make our breads and that would be a lot better for us, but not everybody has the time, the resources or the money to do that. He talks about, if you're going to do anything with this book, to continue eating UPF foods and just kind of notice how they affect you. Notice the tastes and textures, and you start to notice how things kind of taste the same, then maybe trying to incorporate more one ingredient foods, and you may notice that your satisfaction levels are just that little bit higher. It's something I've definitely noticed this past month. The past month I have been eating a lot healthier. I felt like the brain fog that I normally get clearing. I feel less tired on a morning. My concentration levels are better. And then I will have an evening where I eat something that is more UPF and I actually genuinely feel a little bit sick in a way that I had never noticed before. With this though, I will say the reading experience was not fantastic. I recommend this more as an audiobook, but I also particularly recommend listening to podcasts with Chris Van Tulleken talking about this. I also really recommend the audiobook because there is bonus content, particularly conversations between Chris and his brother Zand, in which they kind of are talking about how it is not so easy to just completely cut UPF out of your diet, and also the reaction to this book after it came out, questions that he got from readers as well as different companies. The main one, as I say, that I think is really important to listen to is the conversation about eating disorders, and is this book basically indirectly promoting eating disorders like orthorexia? And he gives an answer that I don't think is completely perfect, but at least I felt like he was very conscious of this, and that he is kind of weighing up the balance between talking about these foods and holding companies and governments to account, but also knowing that there are definitely people who are going to read this and their response might be very extreme and lead to more obsessive thoughts about food. And you can tell he hasn't really reconciled what the perfect thing is to do with this, because I don't think there is one. And like, I feel weird talking about this and saying that I found it as influential as I did, because I also do not want people to be watching this and feeling like, oh my god, then I just have to cut out everything from my diet, because that's not going to work for people either. But as I say, it was really influential. I am thinking about this a lot more. I am very tempted to start making my own bread. Don't know if I'm going to actually do that, but it's given me a bit of incentive to do so. But also I do have to balance that with, you know, living my life, and the fact that I do not want to get to a point where I am just constantly thinking about food and is this UPF, because that just can't be mentally healthy for me. But yeah, an interesting book. Definitely not as like doom and gloom and fear-mongering as I thought it was going to be. The second book on this train of thought after reading Ultra-Processed People that I read was Food for Life by Tim Spector, in which Tim Spector, who I think a lot of people will know as the founder of the Zoe app, talks about the latest in food research and how to eat to live well. Starts off by talking quite generally about diets and nutrition, and then the second part of the book is going through all of these different food groups, going through various fruits and vegetables, going through grains, protein sources, sweet treats, and really digging into the research behind them. I'm not gonna lie to you, it just becomes like lists of food research, which, you know, is interesting, but maybe not the greatest reading experience in the world. And I will say there is a reason that I don't own a copy of this book. I'm not sure necessarily that I'm going to be going back to this, because I did find there were moments in this where I felt like Tim Spector's personal preferences for food kind of got in the way of what he was talking about and got in the way of the advice. And I think this goes to show where I found Chris Van Tulleken to be a lot more useful as a book, was he was deliberately not giving advice, and Tim Spector can't help but give advice, even when it may not necessarily be useful to an individual. There are moments in this book where I felt like the advice that he was giving was kind of contradictory to the research that he was citing, and moments where I felt like the advice was kind of fear-mongering and making people feel like there were foods that they needed to cut out of their diets in order to be truly healthy. I think it's very, very clear from this book that Tim Spector promotes a plant-based vegan lifestyle, which then would come up in conflict with some of the food research that he was talking about meat and fish and dairy. dairy. You could kind of feel like there was a bit of unease there, where he was talking about research that showed the beneficial properties of these, but it was conflicting with the fact that he didn't want to be recommending these foods. And yes, definitely, in order to live a more healthy lifestyle, then definitely we should be eating more plants, and maybe supplementing some meals that we would rely on fish and meat and dairy with plant-based sources like lentils, nuts, seeds. I couldn't help but notice these moments where he was like, okay, here is some evidence that shows that chicken is actually quite good for you, but also I don't think you should be eating it. And yeah, there was just this lack of objectiveness that did kind of rub me up the wrong way. There are definitely aspects of going plant-based that are very, very good for you, but it is not necessarily practical and feasible for everybody. I don't think we should be shaming people. There are also moments where I couldn't help but necessarily feel like he was kind of trying to sell a product, that being the Zoe app, and just moments where he was talking about Zoe's research, which just, I don't know, just felt a little bit like, don't forget I have a product. Also, on a personal level, Tim, how dare you besmirch the name of cucumber? You can take my cucumber and my salad out of my cold dead hands. I don't care if you don't like it. I don't care if you find it disgusting. You will not besmirch the name of cucumber in this house. There are definitely aspects of this book that I did find useful, and things that, you know, I want to take forward. You know, trying to aim for 30 plants a week, I think, is something that I have been trying and have found very beneficial for me. And I think from reading both of these books that trying to reduce my consumption of ultra-processed food is probably going to be a good thing for my overall health. What I don't like is fear-mongering, making people feel bad about the food that they are eating, when people are just trying to get by. People are just trying to live their lives, and there isn't necessarily a perfect pill that is going to apply to everybody. We're all just doing what we can with the resources and the time that we have. And now, after talking for a very, very long time about these books about food and nutrition, and feeling kind of anxious about talking about them, I'm going to talk about 3 books which did not bring me anxiety at all, and actually were probably a bit ridiculous, but also delightful. Firstly, Under Lock and Key by Lana Fergusson, the Loch Ness Monster romance. So this is a romance book which sees our main character of Kiana, who is an American who has come to Scotland following the death of her Scottish father. He had been completely estranged from the Scottish side of his family, but has recently died, leaving Kiana orphaned, and she is wanting to reconnect with the Scottish side of her family, who she's never met, and also bring her father's ashes to be scattered. Kiana's father had always told this story about when he was a young child, when he fell into a loch and was saved by the Loch Ness Monster, which she's always kind of taken with a pinch of salt and been like, yeah, okay, Dad. But she knows this story was important to him, and so wants to scatter his ashes over the loch. And while she is trying to reconnect to her family, her grandmother is quite resistant. It was not an amicable estrangement. Her grandfather is a lot more loving and welcoming. She's trying to work out this family dynamic, but has also come up against one of the hired hands at the farm that her grandparents run, called Lachlan Greer, who she has a bit of a bickering back and forth relationship with. But it becomes very quickly clear that all is not what it seems with Lachlan Greer, and that he has a few secrets of his own. And yeah, I'm not going to consider this a spoiler because it kind of tells you right on the cover. Lachlan's secret is that he is man by day, but the Loch Ness Monster by night. And yeah, this is just about as sweet but also ridiculous as you'd imagine it would be. You've got a lot of this commentary on family dynamics. Both Kiana and Lachlan have a strange family due to various secrets that were brought up in their past. This strong yearning for reconnection. But then also you've got this love plot where Lachlan turns into the Loch Ness Monster every night, and they are trying to work out how to fix the curse that was put upon his family many centuries ago, where all of the men just turn into the Loch Ness Monster at night. And it, yeah. It is so silly. It has heart, yes, but it was also a bit ridiculous. And there were moments with this where I was like, okay. I do think it's a book that gets better as you go on further, as these relationships really start to take root and get under your skin. But then, once again, there are moments where you're just reminded, oh yeah, I'm reading about this woman who is basically having sex with the Loch Ness Monster. Cool. I think you will get a sense straight away if this is for you. If you're curious, give it a shot. It's definitely not the worst romance book that I've ever read. But it's also far from sane. A children's book that I picked up on recommendation from Jen Campbell, watching her best books of 2024, was The Grand Hotel of Feelings by Lidia Brankovic. This is a lovely book about feelings, about emotions, and how we manage them, told from the perspective of the manager of this Grand Hotel for Feelings, and all of the different things that this manager does to accommodate her various guests. Whether that is sadness, anger, happiness, contentment, how we have to pay attention to our feelings, and rather than repressing them and then hiding them, nurturing them, looking after them, giving them the space that they need, and remembering that any feelings that you have are just passing through. They are not going to be there forever, and what we can learn from these various feelings. As I say, I'd seen this book recommended by Jen Campbell. It seemed so lovely. I immediately got a copy for myself, but I also got a copy for my sister and for my nieces, so we were reading this around the same time. I know it's a really important topic for them, and I just thought it was told in such a wonderful way and told with such beautiful illustrations. Once again, so colourful and vivid, and it's just a book that's filled with a lot of heart. And then finally, the last book that I read in January was I Love Rom-Coms and I Am a Feminist, a manifesto in 100 rom-coms by Corrina Antrobus. Through this book, Corrina Antrobus is going on a chronological look at 100 different rom-coms and the feminist messages that we can take from them. Going from 1921 and how Miss Lulu Bett gave women an early lesson in self-respect, all the way through to Greta Gerwig's Barbie in 2023, the rom-com that took the battle of the sexes to a whole new level, and all the many rom-coms in between. And I picked this up, you know, simply because I love rom-coms and I am a feminist, and I wanted to see what this book had to say about these films that really made my life, but also getting recommendations of rom-coms that I had never heard of before, particularly like silent film rom-coms that I'd never heard of. The book is very concentrated, I would say, from the 1980s onwards, as you might expect, but there are so many gems in here that I am very keen to watch. Each film will be represented on a 2-page spread. We'll get a fun little illustration, the main feminist takeaway that we can get from the film, and then just a little bit of information about each one, as well as 2 or 3 rom-coms that are similar in tone and have similar takeaways that you could also watch. There's some really great diverse recommendations in here. For every Notting Hill, there's a How Stella Got Her Groove Back. For every Pretty Woman, there's a Boy Meets Girl. And yeah, what I was the most excited about with this book was all of the rom-coms that I had never heard of that I'm so incredibly interested to check out. And yeah, really good fun. I think this is a really good gift book that you can give to any rom-com loving feminist in your life. So there we go. Those are all of the rest of the books that I read in January 2025. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken to you about today. Alternatively, please let me know about anything you read in January and really enjoyed. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.